Is that working? Yes, perfect. Thank you, Tilda. Okay, so I mentioned that today's session comes as part of the Great Plates Partnership. My name is Eve Blair. I'm the Impact and Strategy Manager at School Food Matters. And we are working in collaboration with the Mayor of London to deliver a series of workshops, events and trainings that are designed to support London's primary schools and local authorities to deliver outstanding school food on every plate. And this work is funded by Partnerships for Healthy Cities. And the real purpose of this work is to leverage the full value of the Mayor's offer of universal free primary schools in London. So I'm going to introduce School Food Matters. I'm going to introduce our lovely presenter today, Rachel O'Grady, and then potentially, I'll see, we're growing in numbers, but it may be that we can all introduce ourselves as well. So at School Food Matters, we believe that food at school can unlock a happier, healthier and more sustainable future for every child. And fundamentally, we work to see a school food system that can deliver for every child so that every child can eat delicious, nutritious and sustainable food during their time at school, and so that they can leave school with an informed and positive relationship to food, that will inform nutritious eating habits for life. And we are lucky enough today to be joined by our guest speaker, Rachel O'Grady. So I'll hand over to you, Rachel, so you can introduce yourself.
Thank you, Eve. Hi guys, thanks very much for joining us today. So I'm Rachel O'Grady. I'm founder and director of consultancy at Riva Partnership. We're a procurement consultancy and we specialise in catering, school food catering. I have an MBA with distinction, which I completed many years ago now. Always had a love for catering, always worked in catering, been a consultant now for over 16 years. And I am a marathon runner, so food is very important to me, both at work and at home. I'm very aware of I am what I eat, and I want to be fast, but I also want to be healthy. So food's a big part of my life. So thank you, Eve.
So brilliant. Rachel today is repping the expertise in catering consultancy and procurement. So we're very happy to have her on board. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Just before we begin the content of today's session, we thought we would set the scene a little bit by doing a kind of refresher on the full value of school food and what it can really deliver for your students in your school when it is done right. Now, since you're all here attending a webinar about school food, I suspect I'm probably preaching to the choir, but it is worth a reminder maybe, or motivating to remember that proper food at school can increase attainment, it can boost attendance, it can do a wonderful job at reducing potentially health inequalities in your student population, improve the way students feel and behave at school, potentially increase a child's lifetime earnings. That's a fact around offering universal free school meals. It can do a lot. Children are sitting down, potentially for 3 meals a day at school. You have the opportunity there to expose children to a wider range of fruits, vegetables, flavours, textures, get them eating stuff that they might not be eating at home, and then support them really to set that relationship with food and a template for healthy eating outside of school that we know can endure into adulthood. So it is a part of everyday school life that we think is fundamentally really important and connected to a lot of other things you might be hoping to achieve at your school. Today's session will be focusing on 3 main topics. So we have routes to market for procurement and understanding the different catering models. I guess that's your kind of catering procurement 101, would you say, Rachel? Like a kind of
yes, absolutely.
Then we've got practical guidance on creating a strong tender and a really good spec that reflects your school community. So that's sort of setting things up so that you end up with a caterer that understands your school and can deliver against what it is you most want. And then lastly, very important, we've got understanding legal requirements and compliance. That's compliance to procurement legislation, but also to school food standards. So this is a more detailed version of that. Is there anything that I've left off? Oh yes, Ted, we'll be talking about timescales. We'll be talking a little bit about contract delivery. And we will also be talking about clustering. Okay, before we get going, what is really helpful for us is to understand which part of today's session you are most interested in. So there's probably, I think, a few too many of us because we've got a lot of content to get through today to do a round of introductions now, but we're still a relatively small group. So what I would love to know is, of those 3 outcomes that we're hoping to leave you with by 5 o'clock, please tell me what you are most interested in learning more about. Is it that routes to market piece, that 101 piece? Is it the tender and spec piece? Or is it the legal requirements piece? I hope you can all see the poll. Your thoughts in there. I can give Rachel a steer on where to focus most. Can everybody see that? School Food Matters people, can you see that?
I can't see it, Eve. I don't know whether that's because I'm sharing slides. We've got a couple of thumbs up. Yeah.
Okay, fabulous, thank you. So most people are here for the tender and needs-led piece. So maybe that's a good place for us to focus on. And I've also forgotten to talk a bit more about the format of today's session. So as I said, we have quite a lot of technical content to pass on to you, or rather Rachel does, to download to you. But we've also tried to leave space for more kind of tailored discussions and space for you to ask any questions that you might have that are directly relevant to your situation and your school. So each of these 3 segments will be followed by a brief Q&A where you'll have a chance to put forward any questions you might have. We've also held space for a 30-minute, much longer discussion period at the end of the session, where we can get a kind of wider conversation going and cover off anything that you're still not certain about after today's session. I should also tell you, for those like me who are keen note takers, the slides and a recording of today's session will be shared afterwards, along with any resources that we talk about during our breakout sessions. Okay, Rachel, I think that's it for me.
Over to me. Wonderful. Thanks very much, Eve. Okay, so we're going to kick off today by understanding the routes to market. And just to emphasise what Eve said there, some of the slides have got a lot of content included, and I've specifically designed them that way, knowing that you guys would get a copy of the slides at the end. So I've tried to make it as useful as a tool for you as possible. So please don't be alarmed by lots and lots of information. I'm mindful of your time, and we will get through a lot of content as quickly as we can. But please do make use of the Q&A sessions dotted throughout. So routes to market, what do we mean by routes to market? We're here today to talk specifically about catering tenders, and it's important that we understand that there's a magic number of £207,720. I'm not sure who picked that very specific number, but that's a really important number to remember. So if your catering contract has a value of anything higher than that, you must go to tender. It's compulsory for you to go out to the market compliantly. That figure of 207,720 is the value of your contract over the entire term of the contract, and it's based on the level of your sales. So if your catering provision is taking in £100,000 a year, and it's a 5-year contract you've agreed with your provider, your contract would be worth £500,000, therefore way over the 207,720, and you must go to tender. And that figure also includes any applicable VAT, which is important to remember as well. So we've got a little dotted line there. Quotations, there's other rules in terms of how you can acquire a caterer outside of a tender, but that's more for very, very small provisions that sit under that important threshold. If you're over the threshold, and we are here today to talk about compliant routes to market, there are lots of frameworks out there that you guys can make use of. There's some positive, some negative thoughts, I think, out there with regards to frameworks, but they are there to help you, to guide you. They do have pre-selected contractors already on their frameworks, so lots of catering providers already there and ready to go, as it were. Or you can go to full tender, which is now known as a covered procurement. That's the official name now for what we used to call above threshold tenders. So anything over the 207 720 would go to a full covered procurement, and that's where you would advertise to the whole market that you're looking for a provider. You would then shortlist those providers, normally to around the top 6, and those 6 would come through to your tender stage, receive your specification, find out a lot more about you, and put their tender bids in. And you then have the option, of course, of using a consultant such as myself or many of the other good guys that are out there. And we would help you with that covered procurement. So if you wanted perhaps something slightly more flexible and slightly more bespoke, there are consultants available as well. But the 2 main routes for a covered procurement, so anything over that 207 720, you must look for your new catering provider either via a framework or through a covered procurement. First very busy slide coming at us already on slide number 2. Again, guys, you will get a copy of all of these slides at the end of the session. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read out all of the risks and rewards, but essentially, as you move sort of from left to the right of the screen, you will get a more detailed, more thorough, more bespoke solution, in my view. But there are pros and cons of each, and there are obviously different costs attached to each as well. But hopefully highlighting that there are many different routes to market, depending on your circumstances, that are available for you. And perhaps at the first Q&A session, if anyone has a specific question on what might be relevant for them, I'd be happy to chat that through. Now, I believe most of you here today are primary schools. Forgive me, I don't have all of your very specific details. I'm also not sure whether or not you guys are standalone primaries, whether you're in trusts or whether you have clustered together. So I wanted to talk a little bit about procuring just for your school or procuring via a cluster. So at Riva, we're doing quite a lot of cluster work at the moment, actually, because there are quite a few local authorities that are ceasing trading, and that has left a lot of primary schools without a provider. And what we're finding is that they are clustering together, so joining together with other primaries that they're not necessarily formally aligned with under a trust or such, to work together to provide a bigger contract opportunity for the market, and to gain the benefits potentially that could bring. So I wanted to just take a pause and have a look at some of the pros and cons of either going out to look for your own provider just for your school, or clustering together with other local schools or other like-minded schools that may want to join the contracts. So I guess procuring alone, it could be more true to your specific values and vision. It would be a specification just for your school, and therefore perhaps more bespoke or preferred to yourselves. And of course, you could run to your own timescale. However, and forgive me for touching on certain commercial slants as we go through our slides, but I want to be as realistic as I can be in our session with you today. The contractors that are out there obviously would look at the size of the opportunity and would be potentially more attracted to a larger opportunity, as in more schools together under one contract rather than one on its own. It may well be a higher cost of contract if you procure on your own, because the contractors will achieve economies of scale if they were to deliver a contract over, say, 5 or 10 or even 15 primary schools as opposed to just one. And of course, you would have sole responsibility for compliance and no support around you if you were to procure alone. Clustering does bring some benefits. You can share the cost of your procurement with the other schools in your cluster. Again, it would be a bigger contract with potential economies of scale, so you might end up with a lower contract cost and to be more attractive to the market. I would add to that as well that the economies of scale aren't necessarily always financial. I think there are economies of scale in terms of management. So you would have potentially one manager across a lot of schools. You could work together. You could all have that bigger voice. as I've noted further on down the slide. So economies of scale can be operational, I suppose is the key point there, as opposed to just financial. Opportunities for broader delivery options. So every primary school is structured differently. Many do have their own kitchens, but of course some don't. And if you're in a larger cluster, it could be that there was the opportunity for a larger school to deliver meals out to others within the cluster and become a host kitchen. You could have a head of cluster. So we talked in the previous slide about being alone. That sounds a little bit desolate, but having your own contracts, you would obviously be fully in charge of. But we have worked together with schools before and encouraged them to cluster together and have a head of the cluster, which potentially could be a joint responsibility, or it could be shared over terms, or shared responsibility from year to year and such, which can work quite well. Relying on other schools, as I say, for that kind of thing. And a blended vision. Some see that as a pro, some as a con. It's incredibly important that your specification is bespoke to your school, whether you procure alone or in a cluster. But sometimes a blended vision can help. And I suppose we're saying sharing ideas and sharing best practice can be another benefit of clustering. So anybody thinking of tendering, I would encourage you to reach out to other schools. It could be the start of a beautiful new relationship, and you could find many other wonderful ways to work together. But certainly when it comes to catering tenders, it can bring benefits. I believe if we're going to drop another quick poll in at this point, just to find out a little more before we get too far into the session about current procurement activity at your school. Eve, are we able to send that one
right.
up?
So please tell us, given this chat about the relative benefits of going it alone or joining up as part of a cluster, are you part of a cluster already? Perhaps you're part of a procurement cluster, but not for school food. Perhaps you're part of a procurement cluster, including school food, or perhaps you are procuring just as a single school, but please let us know. Interesting. Okay, so the majority of people are procuring as a single school at the moment. So hopefully that's interesting to consider. The relative pros and cons. I would, if it's all right, Rachel, I'd love to know whether people are finding, how people are experiencing procuring as a single school. Has anyone encountered any difficulties around that? It's one of the things that comes up quite a lot when we visit schools at School Food Matters. Okay, think it through, and if people are feeling too shy to say, perhaps you can pop it in the chat and let us know.
So please do. And as I say, we've got a Q&A coming up very shortly, and then the longer Q&A at the end. So if anybody's more comfortable staying on for that longer session and asking me any questions or sharing any experience, then that would be great. To round out our session one, which is understanding routes to market, we've talked about the different frameworks, covered procurements or consultancy options, procuring alone versus clustering. And lastly, I wanted to just touch very briefly on understanding the different financial catering models. So when you're choosing your route to market, you also need to be very clear in terms of how you're going to structure your catering contract financially. Now, an awful lot of primary schools are very used to option number one, which is a cost per meal. Most local authority providers still run to that model, and some of the catering contractors out there do as well. So it would be very simply, this is the funding we receive, this is the number of meals that the caterer has served on that day, and we will pay them for that number of meals. Very straightforward. There is a different way to do it in terms of just one annual fixed price. I actually really quite like that idea, and I am working with some London primaries who have Mayor's Meals funding. I could probably keep you here for half an hour talking about the intricacies of fixed price billing in annual fixed price billing in catering contracts. But to put it very simply, if the contractors are selling lots of meals, they're probably making a little bit more profit because they have the same costs, the same labour costs, the same fixed costs, but more money coming in, as it were, I know it can be difficult to think of it like that because it's funding in and passing it on to the contractor. But if you did an annual fixed price and they were working transparently with you, you would be able to see that the more successful they are, hopefully, in delivering great food and increasing the uptake of your pupils, the more money effectively they would be making at the bottom, because their costs wouldn't necessarily rise in line with the income. And it could be that there's some benefits that should be shared there. The third option is what they call a cost plus model, which we're really not fans of. It's a bit of an old fashioned model, and we don't run any of our tenders, primary, secondary, or whichever sector, no matter the funding, on that route. But essentially cost plus means you would pay the contractor what it happens to cost them. So if they overrun their costs, you would pay for that. Or if their meal quality dips, for example, and less pupils are taking it up and their income dips, you would pay for that as well. So 3 clear cost models, and it is important to land on the one that's preferred whilst you're choosing your route to market before you start the tender. First Q&A session is coming up now. We've been through a fair bit, as I say, lots of information, lots of busy slides. Is there anything that's sticking in anyone's mind, or any questions initially just on that session number 1? Everybody quite comfortable with where we are at the moment? Yeah. Okay. We'll keep moving on. I'm going to go through sessions 2 and 3 next, which are how to optimize your procurement process and how to build a great specification. And then we'll take another pause for a brief Q&A session. So optimizing your procurement process. So you've decided to go to tender, you've chosen your route to market, and you've secured your financial model. What we always encourage, certainly all of the schools we work with, to do is to take a pause. So you've decided to go to tender. It's all very exciting. Food's going to be fabulous. Can't wait to get started. But we strongly advise a pause at this stage to have a think about what we call your procurement life cycle. So what I would strongly recommend is starting at the top of the wheel and having a think about your procurement strategy, which sounds all a little bit management speaky, and is that really necessary? We know what we're after. We want some great food, but it is really important to have a think about how your school wants to approach procurement. Are you all about saving costs? Are you all about value? Who are you bringing into your strategy? This shouldn't be, of course, a project run in isolation just by your business manager or even just by your head. Thinking about the resource that you need, bringing in governors, perhaps even talking to pupils. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later on. Stage 2, we've called it procurement and contract management training. You may well not need anything as formal as that, but at the very least, I would strongly encourage you to think about who's going to actually manage your catering contracts once it's in place. So you've gone out to tender, you've got a great provider. And we do see fairly often projects run, they'll come to their conclusion and then they'll say, okay, Bill is going to be in charge of the contract monitoring. You're thinking, who's Bill? He hasn't had any part of the tender or the process, and he doesn't know the bids. And so it's all about thinking about resource availability, competence. Have we got the right person who's up to speed with everything that we've asked for, all of the compliance pieces and what's about to be delivered. So think about your strategy, think about resource, and if any training is required, but certainly getting that person in place that's going to be managing your contracts. Third stage, we've called it best value review. Again, it doesn't need to be anything super formal, but of course, reviewing your current position, really important to have a bit of a benchmark. Where are we at the moment? And that will be a great place to start in teasing out where our areas of improvement are, and it will help that thinking around the whole school approach and everything else it is that we need to put together to get the best meal we can on the plate for our pupils. Then we're ready to tender, and once the tender's done, we move into contract management stage, and then once the contract's been managed and it comes to its end, we're back to our procurement strategy again. So that's certainly how we see things working in terms of best practice. And again, not necessarily a huge formal projects, but just taking a pause on each of those stages can be hugely beneficial in the long run. In terms of your time scales, and this is almost an offensively busy slide, so please do forgive me. Again, there's useful information on there once you get them in your inbox. But essentially what we're saying here is that the tender stage itself takes at least 6 months. And back here again, please remember that certainly in our view, the tender is almost stage 4. So the tender itself is 6 months. So we would recommend really, obviously circumstance dependent, but if you've got a year, it'd be great to know a year in advance, or even sort of now that you're thinking about tendering next year for a new provider for next summer even. Time is always a luxury in these things, and I know it's a bit of a cheesy saying, but the more you put into this process, the better result you're going to get. And time is always a wonderful thing to have on our side when we're putting something as important as this together. But to run a decent compliant tender, it would certainly be a 6-month process plus that pre-planning stage in advance. We're ready for poll number 3, so we'd be really interested to know when your current catering contract is coming to an end.
Let me pop that into the chat. So
thank you.
We're assuming that perhaps some of you are thinking about coming up to tender, and that's why you're here, although it may well be that many of you are just getting your homework in and you're learning in advance. So let us know, when's your current catering contract coming to an end? Less than 6 months, imminent, part of stage 4, as Rachel described, 6 to 12 months, 1 to 2 years, or more than 2 years. Leave that open. 2 more minutes. It's a pretty even split, to be honest, isn't it?
Okay.
I don't know if you can see that, Rachel, but between
I can't, but interesting to know that it's evenly split.
We've got a less than 6 months, a 1 to 2 years, and a more than 2 years.
Okay. As an aside, we did do a separate session on contract management for those of you who are mid-contracts. There's lots that you can do there, even if it's more than 2 years to go, to really start improving your position. But yeah, for those that are in the shorter timescales, please do bear in mind that we've just gone through in terms of how to really make the most out of a project such as this and get really great result at the end. Okay, we've provided you with a little getting ready checklist. Again, this will arrive in your inbox. Item number 1, as we've said, please get your timescales agreed as far in advance as you possibly can to give a really nice amount of time for the whole project. Agree your route to market, which we've touched on earlier today, and your catering model. Think about your resource availability and competence. I hope that's the right word, but making sure you've got the right person that's confident, I suppose, is a better word, to manage your catering contracts once it's gone live. Agree stakeholders' involvement. So take a small pause there. I talked very briefly about making sure it's not a project in isolation for anyone, really, and because there are so many stakeholders that hopefully will benefit from a great catering provision. And really important to keep going back to that whole school approach and getting views from governors, from the head, from the SLT, from the pupils themselves, from their parents. There's lots of different stakeholder groups who could really feed some valuable information into your project and make sure you are tailoring it and bespoking it, whether you're tendering alone or clustering. Let's get all of the information, all of the views, and really take this as an opportunity. Opportunity is my favourite word. It's my buzzword when it comes to tendering. It breaks my heart to just see an average spec go out and average bids come in, and it's all very generic. It really needn't be. It is your opportunity to really ask the market for exactly what it is you're looking for. The objectives piece, that's kind of our stage 3. I've called it best value review, but really having a look at your current provision, working out what's working well, what's not working quite so well, really building that into your specification, again, tailoring it, bespoking it, and guiding the market. There are lots and lots of schools will say, I want to tender, I want great quality and a really good price, please. And there's a bit of a depressing full stop after that. There's an awful lot more that you could be looking for in terms of your objectives. Having a really good think about cost versus operations. So The current contracted or in-house, to be fair, the current catering provisions out there are struggling. I think we all know that. It's another sort of 2-hour-long session, which we haven't got time for today. We're very mindful as well that schools' budgets are very, very tight. But it is really, really important to be very honest with yourselves in terms of how important is cost versus operations. Are some schools looking to make money from their catering? Hopefully not. But are some schools saying cost is just as important as operations? Are some schools saying cost is perhaps 35% of our objective and our marking, with operations being the remaining 65%? Really important that you agree that with all your stakeholders, and really important that you're clear on that with the market, because they can deliver whatever you want. If you're looking to make a lot of money from your catering operation, you'll be disappointed with what's on the plate, but the market will be guided that way. And but hopefully, if you're really clear in those objectives and really clear on how important the operations are, and therefore the food delivery, that will be made clear at tender stage as well. Thinking about your different parameters, we're going to talk a little bit later about what else it is that's involved in a tender outside of the food, if that doesn't sound like too much of a weird thing to say for a catering tender, but there's lots of other good stuff that needs to come together to deliver that great food for your pupils. And again, as we touched on, contract management planning, please make sure that you do see this hopefully as a life cycle, and what's going to happen from day one to the end of year 5, who's going to look after that for you. Another busy slide that I hadn't planned on touching on all of these, but there are lots of documents to develop when you're putting a tender together. And the really key ones in the top right there, your specification, and we are going to drill down on that on the next slide and the next session. But there's lots of mandatory documents that need to be published. If you're doing a covered procurement, you need to have a think about the response documents. What questions are you going to ask the contractors to answer to make sure that you can be really, really confident that they're understanding your spec? How are you going to evaluate it? How are you going to score it? How are you going to moderate your scoring? And then more formal notices that need to be published, award notifications, award notices, and due diligence sections. So please don't be too frightened by that. But the Procurement Act did bring with it, well, one man's transparency is another man's admin burden, is what I have been known to say at certain times, but quite rightly so. The Procurement Act does now dictate that there's an awful lot more that we do need to publish in the public domain when we go through a tender. So I'll perhaps take a pause on there. I'm mindful of time. But again, any questions, or if you want me to pop back to that in the Q&A, I'd be very happy to. Want to focus on the top right document, though, the specification. And you guys have said earlier that building a great spec is of interest to you. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and then we'll have a pause for a Q&A. So your specification, developing collaboratively. Again, we've already touched on that, but just to double down on it, it is really important to take everybody's views. It's the pupils themselves that are going to be eating your food, so why would we not take feedback from the end user, as it were? Parental engagement, absolutely key during your catering provision, but equally when you're building your spec, let's get some feedback, let's send some surveys out, bring the parents in, anything we can do to get a really rounded, collaborative view of what we want. And from the broader school as well, it goes back to item 1, the strategy. Collaboratively as a school, what are we looking for? Can we be a little more specific than just great food that's really good for quality and everybody likes? Again, what works well or not so well at the moment? Item 3, I believe, on our little wheel. Have a real good look at where you are at the moment, and just be clear with the market. I'm a big advocate of just being really open and honest and transparent. And if you've got issues at the moment, tell the market about that. Translate those issues into objectives to be achieved, i.e. those issues turned around as part of your tender process, and be really clear about those objectives. That can actually be really helpful when it comes to contract monitoring as well. If you've got maybe even half a dozen objectives for a contractor to achieve via your tender process, why not have those as your KPIs moving forward? Are they meeting our objectives? It couldn't be more simple than that, and it couldn't be more bespoke than that in making sure that what's promised is delivered. Clear responsibilities. We've talked about the contract management piece, but I think the contractors are really keen to know that they have got an engaged school and engaged clients, as they would call you. So being really clear on what the responsibilities are of the school. So giving them your time, giving them your ideas, your thoughts, your feedback, which doesn't always happen. I say that sort of somewhat glibly, but I do get phoned reasonably often by contractors saying things aren't going so well, but I just can't get hold of the client. I've been trying for 3 months and they haven't got any time for me. So see it as a partnership, I think is the message there. And of course, the responsibilities from your caterer. Let's be really, really clear in the spec. The spec will become our Bible, and we want to be able to go back and say, we have clearly laid out these as your responsibilities. And the next slide will dig into that a little bit further. And again, when it comes to the contract management piece, much easier. We've said you're responsible for these 10 things, and we think you're only achieving 9 of them. So that's really important. Compliance, I think we're all aware that school food standards are undergoing a really exciting review at the moment. So we'll wait to see exactly where that lands. But of course, compliance, always a responsibility of the school, but very, very important that you've got a trusted caterer who can effectively take on that responsibility of delivering, and you can make sure that that is then happening. The other side of that, of course, is the compliance in terms of procurement law. So if you don't go through a framework and you do choose a covered procurement, you can, of course, use a consultant who would look after compliance for you. But if you don't, our last session today is going to talk a bit about quite a few different boxes you need to tick to run a compliant procurement process. Transparency and accountability. Again, I want to go back to this notion that your spec is your Bible. I encourage you to be really transparent about what you want, to be really open and honest with them. And the accountability piece is kind of attached to that, I suppose. So we're trying to encourage you to position yourself as sort of the school of choice for them, somebody that they would really want to work with. They understand you, you understand them, and that the contractors are really clear on your expectation of them moving forward. So transparency, what information are they going to feed you every month? Meal numbers, anything else that might be going on in the canteen area, P&Ls, all of that sort of management information that you should be expecting from them going forward. And as we've talked about a few times already, moving into your contract management. We have contract management in our specifications. We're very clear on exactly what we expect from contract management. And I would encourage you to take that view. I think if you put, we want really good management, full stop, that's kind of up for debate a little bit. So I would certainly build into your spec, the expectation would be a minimum of a monthly meeting, audits quarterly, KPIs at the frequency of your choice, perhaps even a minimum response time, all of that kind of thing. So I know some of this sounds a little bit draconian, but I think if all parties know exactly what the expectation is, it's got to be a positive thing for starting a contract on the right foot.
Yeah, and if I might just come in on that, Rachel, as well, I think also, rather than draconian, having that kind of that regular contract with the caterer that's operating in your school allows you to build that more collaborative relationship. You can start to potentially I don't know, just communicate a bit better about some of the things that are going well and less well. So that's the flip side of it, I think.
Yeah,
one
absolutely.
of the things that we see quite regularly in our Nourish school food improvement work is that relationship has broken down, and it's often broken down for a number of reasons, to be honest, but often those regular check-ins are not happening, and in the gap between regular meetings, which can end up being quite long, a lot of stuff is kind of is filling that gap. So people are coming up with their own ideas about why things are not working, rather than addressing them with the other party.
Absolutely.
Relationship breakdown.
Yes, and I have heard many a time from the school, I'm just not getting on with my contractor. They're not very good. Things aren't good. And I say, oh goodness, I'm sorry to hear that. What's not working well? And I say, it's just not very good. It can get to a stage where you're almost a bit lost as to where the issues are. The next few slides are going to talk about the importance of your spec as the Bible, being really clear on what you're expecting and then about KPIs. But yes, in my view, you should be meeting monthly, whipping through those KPIs, and that's really helpful for your caterer. So you can say to them, this is how I'm feeling at the moment, and then they can ring you a couple of days later and say, thanks ever so much for that, we've nipped it in the bud, we're sorted, and the problem's gone away. And so it's that partnership and that relationship, which with any partnership and relationship in our lives, it can only work with communication.
Yes, rightly said. And for those who are interested in finding out a bit more about setting KPIs, we have, as part of this same series, run an entire session on contract management, which I will drop the link to the recording in the chat now. Rachel, while you carry on.
Great, thank you, Eve. Yes, please do. So the next slide after this is the last in session 3, and we'll pause for a Q&A. The next slide is about KPIs. But in that previous session we did about contract management, it goes into an awful lot more depth. So we'll touch on it top level in just a second. But there's more information there for you if you like to read through that. So yes, your spec is your Bible. Please remember that. So having a think about who should we include. So we talked about collaboration, the different stakeholders that can all feed into your specification. So we're back at stage number 1 now on our wheel, which we've called strategy. And this is very much a big part of it. Who should we include? What's our direction? What are the thoughts out there? How can we really start building holistically? What should we include? Now, this is probably another entire section, and I'm not sure, Eve, if we were going to put a little one-pager together in terms of some bullet points for the spec, but the food, the compliance, the standards, the quality is absolutely critical and very much what we're focused on them delivering to the highest standards at all times. But I would hugely encourage you to think a little broader than that and include in your spec things like marketing requirements, how are they going to get the message out there? Staffing requirements, management expectations, quality checking KPIs, sustainability, social value needs to be in there, continuous improvement ideas. There's an awful lot that I feel should go into a spec. So yes, the food is absolutely critical, but no contractor can deliver great food without all of those other key elements to the specification. Be prescriptive, but allow for innovation. So what I mean by that is, certainly in our view, the more successful procurement projects would say something like, queuing is a big problem and it's a key objective of ours to reduce the queues. How would you best go about doing that? And see what their answer is. So we talk a lot in our previous session about KPIs and being very careful with KPIs and with objectives not to drive the wrong behaviours, because what we don't want them is rushing the little ones through to try and hit a certain target. But the point in this context is let them know what you're looking for, but give them the freedom to come back to you with an innovative solution to that problem. And again, design your contract management. Please make sure your contract management is in your specification. So the contractor knows what the expectation is, you know what the expectation is, you've got the right person in place, you've got your KPIs, you've got your monitoring system, and you've got every chance of getting a great tender that is actually then sustainably delivered through the contract term. KPIs, again, a lot more information in our previous session, which was focusing exclusively on what happens after the tender has been run and your provider's in place. But just a few key points on KPIs. Please obviously link them to your specification. It has been known that tenders have been run and fantastic bids have come in and contracts have been signed, and then completely different KPIs have been put together which haven't even been mentioned in specs or deliverables. So please make sure it all links together. Make sure they're measurable. I would caveat that by saying to an extent. For me, certainly I'm always a bit more flexible when I'm designing KPIs, and I actually don't mind a KPI that says, are you happy? Are you happy with our service? Yes or no? Obviously the danger is the open door then, because it could be a no and a 3-hour meeting about what's going wrong, or you could say, is the food good quality? They think yes, you think no. But I think your KPIs need to be useful. I've seen lists of 30 odd items that have all got ticks in the boxes, but the client's still not happy. So it's really making sure that you've got a nice mix of KPIs that cover all the areas that you're looking for, but actually give a result that reflects how you're feeling. Please remember that carrots are more motivating than sticks. I'm a big fan of this one as well. So typically KPIs are a little bit of a stick to beat the contractor with, and it will be a sort of a, you know, you haven't done this and you haven't done that and do this or else kind of an approach. I much prefer the carrots. I think KPIs that say something like, I don't know, if you pass all of your KPIs consistently for the first 3 years of the contract, we'll automatically give you the contract extension. We won't go back to tender. That would be hugely more motivating for your provider to think that there's a prize at the end if they do a really good job, rather than the sticks coming for me if I do a bad job. In my view, I would remember the carrots when you're putting your KPIs together. And forgive me, it says next session Thursday the 12th of February, which was some time ago now, but please do go back to the link. We recorded that session. If you want to hear a bit more about KPI development, that's available for you.
I've just popped that in the chat now.
Great, thank you, Eve. Thank you, that's useful.
I'm particularly enjoying the graphic that we've put on that slide of a carrot, but then the backup of an extraordinarily spiky stick to go with it.
Yes, indeed.
I'm just thinking about time, Rachel, because we're running a tiny bit behind and we are about to open up half an hour of time for questions. Might it be worth jumping over this shorter Q&A and moving through the remaining content? And then
yes, absolutely.
Unless anyone has a burning question that they wish to share now.
The very last session is only a couple of slides, so shall I whiz through that and then we can take a longer pause. So understanding the legal requirements and compliance. Again, guys, this is probably another all-day session to go into the intricacies of the new Procurement Act and all of the boxes that need to be ticked. But I've tried to condense it down into literally just a couple of slides. So the Procurement Act went live last February, so it's just over a year old. And they did update the procurement statement, principles and objectives. So we've kept it top level to that extent for today's purposes. But if you are going to procure outside of any consultancy support or anything like that, I would really make sure as part of your strategy you've got, are we compliant, as a big part of your first tick box. So please go and review the Procurement Act policy and the principles and objectives. It's all reasonably straightforward and it's all really good stuff, but just about what you need to do to keep compliance and keep in line with the Procurement Act's objectives itself. Procurement procedures, we've talked a little bit about covered procurement. Within that, there used to be 8 different ways of running a covered procurement. There are now only 3. So if you are going to run your own covered procurements, in very, very top level terms, you can either open your tender to the whole market and everybody would bid, but you might end up with about 20 bids. But it's a shorter route to market, and it is still a valid procedure. Or you can do the covered procurement that certainly we always follow, which is restricted procedure. So you would advertise to the market, get lots of interest, shortlist your top 6 and bring them through to your tender. But the procurement procedures have changed, and that is quite a big change, because there were lots and lots of different ways to run a procurement. But now the competitive flexible procedure is kind of all encompassing. So again, I sort of went a bit all or nothing here. There's an awful lot that sits behind what that particular procedure looks like, but make sure that you've landed on a procedure and you stick to that. What else is new under the Procurement Act? All of the notices. I shouldn't pull a face when I say that, but there are a lot of notices to fill in at different stages, but it's all with the best intentions in mind. So transparency is an absolutely key objective of the new Procurement Act. You must be transparent to be compliant, and the notices will help you do that. So you're publishing notices at various different stages of your tender, giving the required information at each stage. And then compliance and rules. There are lots and lots of rules that sit around the Procurement Act, and the procurement police are out there. They are out there. So I don't want to scare you guys with that, but they are new departments. the public procurement review service was always there, and that's where a supplier could raise a challenge against you if you're running your procurement alone. They could raise a challenge against you, or your consultant indeed, if they thought you hadn't run a compliant process. But the two new departments that are out there are now the PCS, Procurement Compliance Service. They are out there looking at what they call contracting authorities compliance. So they're actually now looking at the compliance of the processes rather than relying on your suppliers, your catering providers that have been part of it, to raise any concerns. And there is now a debarment review service. There is now a debarment list. That's more for the suppliers to make sure that they're compliant, but there is now effectively a naughty list, a debarment list, which suppliers can end up on if they're not compliant or do anything really wrong. So again, not to scare you, but it is an important change as part of the procurement act that there is now a body of people that are actively looking at compliance to make sure that it wasn't just a huge amount of work to rewrite the public procurement law with nobody then checking that we're following it. So please be mindful of that. In conclusion, there's my favourite word again. Please remember that procurement is an opportunity. Please try, I mean, you don't have to use our particular way of thinking about things, but please try and see it as a bigger piece. So it's not just, oh, we need to tender quick, right? Where can we get a spec from? Let's just rush things out. The more you think about it, the more you build it properly, the better result you will get, undoubtedly. So cling to the word opportunity. I find it really exciting. I'm a procurement geek, self-confessed, but I just find it hugely satisfying to see a really good procurement run and a great result come out at the end. And very lastly, of course, please don't forget about the school food standards. I hope it hasn't struck any of you as odd that we haven't talked too much today about the standards. Today is very much about tendering and the process and how we can bring it all together and get you the right provider. But of course, school food standards are absolutely key. They are changing for the good, but you guys do have a statutory requirement to make sure that you are compliant. With the new school food standards, there is going to be a new mandatory method of monitoring. I believe it's still under review, but keep an eye out for that. And I think that's all good stuff. So let's not just run a tender and then sort of hope for the best and pass it all to the contractor. Keep that partnership going, keep that interest going. And perhaps back over to Eve for some of the resources that you guys can provide in terms of that.
Yeah, we never pass up an opportunity to talk to schools about school food standards compliance, because one of the things that we sometimes find is that this is outsourced essentially to the provider. I wouldn't do that. I think schools do have a statutory requirement to monitor school food standards already. Don't leave it to your caterer. I think it's also worth saying that you should have a named school food governor. Governors can be an amazing asset in improving and monitoring school food. And I'm curious, I'll save my curiosity for the Q&A, but that's certainly what we observe. I think when you have a lot of other things to do, monitoring compliance against school food standards can feel a bit overwhelming. It's actually not. It's not incredibly difficult to do. It's not as complicated as it might first seem, and I doubt it will get any more complicated with the review, which of course we also are very supportive of. Tilda has just popped into the chat a set of useful tools that are designed for schools to support you in checking school food standards compliance, so understanding what compliant food looks like, and then providing you with some useful tools that you can go and take with you into the canteen when you're having a poke about. And also we are running a series of trainings that will probably focus a lot about compliance and monitoring compliance later in the year.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks, Eve. That's really useful. We're actually almost perfectly on time. I'm amazed. I would say as well that if you have got a contracted solution, which is what today's been about, if you've run a good tender and you've got a really good provider in place and you're using monthly KPIs, I would put compliance on that KPI as well. So yes, the schools are responsible for checking, but just making sure that you're staying close to your contractor and having that real sort of three-way governor school contractor relationship that includes a check on compliance. Sometimes the KPIs and the checks go a little bit more towards obviously quality, which is important, and perhaps finances, which are important. But let's add compliance in there as well. I think that's always a good idea. So at 28 minutes past 4, we're ready to do a quick wrap up. We're then just going to do one last poll to ask you if there's anything else you would like to have any follow up on, and then Eva will be back over to you, and then the Q&A. So to conclude, I'm very mindful that I've whizzed through this at really quite a speed today. There's hopefully a lot of useful content in there that you can reflect on, and when we share the slides and the recording. So agree your setup. What's your route to market? Are you going to use a framework or go to full tender? Are you going to cluster up with some other schools? Do the ends of your contracts with the other schools align? If not, that's really not the end of the world. That's something that perhaps we could touch on in the Q&A. Do you have shared values and visions? If you are going to cluster up, is that going to work? Do you fit together nicely as a group? Secure your resources and be compliance confident, as I've worded it there. So making sure that you're absolutely clear on what the tender is going to involve, making sure that you can run that compliantly, and making sure that you've got the right resource at the back end as well for point 3, the contract management. So who's going to manage your contract? Have they been included, hopefully, in that whole cycle? And have they got the time and the skills to execute that contract management? And number 4, collaborate. So certainly at School Food Matters, they do a huge amount of great work in terms of the whole school approach. It'd be great if every school in the country took that approach. But what does your school, your parents, your pupils, what does everybody want? It's back to that word again, opportunity. Let's really make everybody feel like they've had a voice in building a really great specification. So you've got something really nice, bespoke, needs-led that's going out to the market. So you've got every chance of the most relevant bids coming back to you for a great provision moving forwards. And I think that pretty much wraps up the content for today. Eve, I'll pop over to you to talk a little bit more about the other sessions we have done and what else is coming up.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. An amazing and very detailed whistle-stop tour through tendering. So as mentioned, we've already run sessions for schools that are looking at contract management. So there's one for external providers, which will likely be of greater interest to the people in today's session. But just to let you know, there's also one for people with in-house catering arrangements too. It might be interesting to know that we've also run 2 sessions that are targeted at local authorities, but they're on topics that are potentially quite interesting to primary schools. So they cover stuff like auto-enrollment, SEND provision, improving the dining environment, and you'll find all of that in the link that I've already shared in the chat if you're curious to find out more. The next wave of support through the Great Plates programme is free consultancy. So we know that lots of schools already use a catering consultant to get things done. We know that lots of them feel that it's out of budget for school food procurement. What we'd like to offer is a free 15-minute session. It is in fact with Rachel that you can book. Tilda, if you could perhaps pop the booking, I've just noticed the booking link's not on here. If you could pop that into the chat, that would be fabulous. We're running 3 of those sessions that you can book into. Thank you, Tilda. One on the 22nd of April, so that's quite soon next week, one on the 15th of May, and one on the 24th of June. So if you have a burning question that you do not manage to cover off in the upcoming Q&A, please let us know. And there will, at some point later in the year, be online training for governors and school business managers that will sit alongside that. Oh, thank you, Tilda. I can see that Tilda has popped it in. Right, before we move on to the Q&A, we would like you to hear a bit more from you about 2 things. Firstly, how you found today's session. Tilda, I know some people are going to start jumping off now if they haven't got time for the Q&A. So if you could maybe, miles ahead of me, Tilda, thank you. So you'll see in the chat a feedback form. I know it's annoying when people give you feedback forms. It would be really helpful for us if you could fill that in and let us know whether or not today's session did what it said on the tin. It's also useful for us to have some kind of understanding of what it is you might like from this series next, because we're coming to the end of the first wave of support, and we're intrigued to find out more about what would be genuinely helpful for schools in the space around school food procurement. But to be honest, Rachel, I think I'm going to give people 2 minutes to fill in the form, and then we can cover that off in the Q&A. Please do stay in touch with us. We love to chat. This is where you can find us. So we've got one inquiries, general kind of inquiries, email for School Food Matters. I'll put mine in the chat, my direct one as well, and one for the Riva partnership, which will put you back in touch with Rachel. Get in touch with us with your procurement questions, with your general school food questions. We're always intrigued to find out more about what schools are thinking about when it comes to school food. Okay. All right, let's open the floor to our attendees. I think you're quite a quiet group, but I also suspect that there are people here who have come with a particular question in mind. Please feel free to either sing out or to pop it in the chat and we will relay it to Rachel to answer. Ooh, a very good one. Does anyone mind sharing how much they pay per meal? How much variation do you see in this, Rachel, in your work?
An awful lot. An awful lot.
Us too.
Yeah. So catering is very, very complex, more so in secondaries, I would say, because the more outlets they have, the more staff they'll need for the same number of pupils. Some schools have local government pensions within their staffing body, some don't, which can add costs. Most schools should be able to dictate the paid meal price for those of you who have Key Stage 2. It should be something that you can talk to your provider about, or if you're in-house, to set yourselves. But it will always be about that sort of P&L. So not many schools want to subsidise their provision, but equally there is only so high that you can push that meal price. But yeah, there's a lot of noise around the meal price at the moment. So FSM funding's 261. It's not a lot of money for food and labour and all sorts of other things. It can very much so be enough in certain schools, but tiny primaries with only one form of entry, for example, will really, really struggle to break it even unless the meal price goes through the roof. So I'm really sorry to sit on the fence, but it's almost a bit of a dangerous question to ask because it very much depends on your pupil numbers, your demographic, your staffing setup, and many different things.
It will absolutely vary according to that. We've quite relatively recently done a piece of research called The Cost of a School Meal that looks at some of the issues around it's going to get political now, systemic underfunding of the school meal price, which although it's crept up and although in London we are relatively lucky with it, is not quite where it should be at. But I will leave it, Rachel, thank you for your question. I will leave it for others in the chat if they feel bold to share what it is that they currently pay per meal, because it's not always exactly the same as what is provided by the Mayor's Welfare. Okay. Next question, if you're ready.
Sure.
I am currently in a 56 consortium for catering, which is very expensive. Claire, I might need you to clarify whether that is a thing, a 56 consortium, or a consortium with 56 other schools. The contract is currently in the +1 year, so we're currently looking at tender for September 27 onwards. It's relatively imminent. I don't think this is the best fit for the school, but I'm not sure about going it alone. What is your advice?
It's a tricky one. I mean, if that consortium was run well, not suggesting that it isn't, but that should be a really big opportunity for you. But it would have to be run that they can get to a point where a cluster is a little bit too big and you can find yourself a bit lost. I think it very much depends how it's going to be run. To be somewhat controversial, if I'm allowed to be, I think if that was run through a framework with that number of schools, I think you might struggle to get the absolute most bespoke result for your school in particular. But going it alone is a little bit scary as well. I think ideally you would have somebody else with you. I would be very mindful that lots of local authorities are going under. One of the reasons being they do tend to pick up the single site primary schools because the contracted world, I'm sorry to have to say this, are reluctant to pick up single primary schools because they just can't break them even. The bigger the contracts, the more you can share all of those costs. So I think just one primary school tendering on its own at the moment can be a bit scary. I don't want to put you off. It's certainly doable, but the market is hugely buoyant, if I can use that word, as in there's lots and lots of tender activity, and the contractors will cherry pick. And I think primaries that are brave enough to go it alone are struggling in some instances to get a really good deal from, because a lot of the providers just aren't going for single site schools. I'm sorry to say, please don't shoot the messenger.
Rachel, feeling nervous in delivering that advice, I think, but that's certainly
I mean that is the honest picture of the market out there at the moment. I mean I think tenders can be just, again, huge opportunity and bring great results, but I don't want to sort of big all of that up without talking about the other side of it. You know, the potential. If you are tendering alone, you won't get the attention of the whole market, I wouldn't have thought, at the moment, unfortunately.
No. And is there I'm, for the benefit of the group, not a procurement expert, which is why we are lucky to have Rachel here today, but is there a third way? There must be some other, what are the other routes that Claire could potentially think about if she's not sure about joining this very large consortium, not sure about going it alone? Is there like a middle way? But there's also kind of the option potentially to take your catering in-house, which is a slightly different conversation.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, in-house can work. Again, it's about resource and competence internally, but there's great people like you guys, Eve, that can help. Well, chefs in schools are very good at helping in-house solutions. If it were me, I would think about any, I don't know, business manager forums I'm on, or any other schools locally. I would put a message out there to see if anybody else is interested. You've got a really nice amount of time now to just put the feelers out and see if anybody else in your local-ish area is looking, and see if you can find a little cluster. I've actually found it really interesting seeing some of these schools come together. It can really genuinely be the start of something really quite healthy, and it can extend from catering in time, potentially, not just even from procurement, just as a bit more of a little sort of support network. I would put the feelers out. There may well be others in the same boat as you.
Right. So forming a splinter group, we're saying.
A splinter group, yes.
A splinter group around school food procurement, potentially. Claire, you haven't said which local authority you're in, but one of the things that the local authorities that we are in touch with are interested in doing is supporting schools to form those appropriately sized clusters, so that people aren't out there. Oh, in Ealing, brilliant. So could be worth getting in touch with Nicole McGregor at Ealing Council. I don't know whether you're already in touch with her, but we could connect you to say that this is something that you're interested in doing, and that does she have any advice? They're lucky to have a really good public health officer there with a specialist interest in school food. So let me know.
That's good.
If you need an intro. And also, is there anybody else on the call who potentially has something to say about that? Has anyone done that? Has anyone gone out to find? I know we have a few people who are already part of a cluster. Well, I think only one. Actually, it might have been you, Claire. But just checking that there's no expertise across our participants today. And thank you, Tilda, for popping the Chefs in Schools link in the chat. So I know, Claire, you're thinking that in-house isn't the way to go for now, but for anyone who is considering that, we would always send you off towards our long-time collaborators, Chefs in Schools, to explore that a bit more. Do I have any other questions?
If we come off the call, as often happens to me, and you suddenly think, that was what I was going to ask, please do reach out, because we are here. Please make use of the sessions as well. I can see, Tilda, you're popping the booking links in the chat. If there's anything you'd rather think about a bit more and you wanted to book a little bit of time in one of those sessions, I'd be delighted to see if I can help you with regards to anything we talked about today, or anything catering related. And don't forget our other sessions as well are up there. There's a lot of good stuff in there, I think, particularly about contract management for those that were perhaps still a little early in their tender cycle. So yeah, lots of good stuff out there.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody, for hanging out with us and chatting about procurement. We hope to continue the conversation as we go. Remember where we are. Send us all your questions and thoughts, and keep in touch. But otherwise, thanks so much to Rachel as well for such an informative session.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks for joining us, guys.
We'll be in touch. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.